All right, next example website. So this time we're going to be building this one. So a little bit more advanced from what we just did. We're bringing in a grid and an image. Still really simple, clean, and effective. So let's jump over to our HTML. Maybe I'll pull this across so that we can see it just here. We'll zoom in a little bit. Okay. So the first thing we want to do, again, is to add our HTML. Now this time we're going to break it up into two sections with a grid. So we've got our overall page. We'll make a section. And inside that section we'll have two divs. And this is often how I would write my project. I start with the outer containers and then work my way in. So I've got my section, which is basically the whole page on this one. And then I've got my two divs. And I want to add GridLex classes to make these into two columns. Before I do, let's jump over to the CSS. We'll do our CSS reset and we'll say padding 0, margin 0. Now, this is what we're going to end up with, but while we're starting, it can actually be helpful to add a little bit of padding. Let's say 1%, just to make it simple. And to add a border to every element, just so that we can see what we're doing. We're going to get rid of this at the end. But let's say we add a border, 1 pixel solid, and then we'll make it really light. Let's say 255, 245. And then we can see every element on the page. Now it looks like a lot of boxes. Let's make that a bit darker in case the resolution's not too good on the video. Okay, looks like a lot of boxes. So we've probably got our HTML element, our body element, our section element, and then our individual divs. So rather than putting padding on the whole body, on every element, let's just select our specific elements that we're trying to see. So our section and our div. Okay, so we can kind of see that there. I'll again make this even darker just so you can see it. Perfect. All right, and we could even put this border just on those elements if that's all we're trying to see. Okay, so we've got our section, we've got our two divs, we want them to sit next to each other. So there's two parts to using GridLex. The first is to add it to the head section of our HTML. And in CodePen, we do that in the settings. So we go to the pen settings, we find HTML stuff for head. Now you could copy and paste it here manually. If you go to CSS, CodePen will actually find and add resources for you, just to make it easier. So if I type in GridLex, I click to add. And remember, GridLex is a CSS framework that's going to pre-calculate and pre-write all the CSS that we need to create grid layouts so that we don't have to do anything fancy around how to calculate the widths. Okay, save and close. Perfect. All right, now we need to add our classes to our HTML. So we want a class of grid on the section and a class of col6 on the child elements. All right, so now we've got our two columns sitting there perfectly. Now let's jump back over here and see what we need. We've got probably a H1, a H2, a paragraph, and 3 links. So we want to put those into the first div. Now often as your HTML gets more complicated, I would add some comments. You can do a comment with a caret, exclamation mark, dash dash, and then you close it with dash dash caret. So in here I'll say first column. And see how that just helps us get a little bit of a gauge of where we are. Okay, so in our first column, we want a H1, Jenny Smith. We want a H2, graphic designer. Okay, we want a paragraph. And then we want our links. So just like last time, we're going to create a nav element, and then inside we're going to add a couple of links. So we'll go a href equals hash, and then the first one is work. The second one is about. And the third one is contact. Okay, then we close our nav. Always remember to close the elements you open. And then that's the end of our column, so we're closing our div. Now, if you click on an element, the matching pair will be underlined. So that's a good way of just quickly checking that you've opened and closed everything. Okay, so that is everything we need on this side. Now we're actually into the CSS. So this image here is going to be a background image because we want it to fill the whole space. So let's start with the background image because that's probably the most interesting. We want to add a background image not on all of our divs, just on one. So to do that, we need to add another class. So let's go over here, put a space, BG image. Then in our CSS, and I can get rid of this placeholder CSS. In our CSS, we want to say .bg image, and then we want to say background image URL. You guys can copy this. It's a lot to remember off the top of your head. And then I'm going to paste the URL just here. Now I've already found the URL of my image, so I will copy it and paste it. Okay. Now, it might not look like it's worked, but if I go back to the image, what I can see is this little corner here. So by default, the image will display the full size of the image. What we want it to do is to shrink to fill the space. So let's say background size, cover. There we go. And then background position, center. So as it adapts, it's going to crop different parts of the image. We want it to always focus on the center of the image. And depending on your image, this might be center, top, bottom, depends where the focal point is. In this image, the focal point is the middle. Cool. All right, now we want to stretch this down to fill the whole page. And there's a couple of ways we can do that. If we try the obvious thing and say section min height, that means the minimum height of our section, 100%. Nothing happens. Now, percentages, annoyingly, can only really be used to measure the width of the browser or the viewport. They don't effectively measure the height. So if we want to stretch it to the height, there actually didn't used to be a way of doing this a couple of years ago, not without using advanced JavaScript. Now there's a new CSS value called VH. So we've got pixels, percentages, rems. I know it's a lot to keep up with. Now we've got one called VH, which says measure the viewport height. This is our viewport, and make it a percentage of that. So if I say 100 VH, that will stretch to the entire height of the viewport. Pretty cool, huh? All right, now let's go ahead and change our typography. So the font I'm using for this is Lato. I will go over here, find Lato, add it, customize it. So we've got maybe light. I haven't used any italic. Add bold and copy that over. So settings, HTML, paste it in. Okay. Now we want to apply that to everything. So we can target our body and say font family Lato. Perfect. All right. Now let's add some padding around this element. So there's a couple of ways we can do it. I like to use really reusable classes. So if I create a class of, say, padded, and then I come down here and target that class of padded and say padding 5%. That's the way I like to do it. Then it's reusable. As I'm creating more sections, I can just add a class of padded wherever I want and it'll automatically add that padding. Okay. Now, sometimes when we're starting to build real projects, our CSS can get a bit messy and disorganized. So one of the things that I like to do is to create little kind of headings or guidelines for myself. So here is all kind of my universal styles. Then I might say typography and put all of my typography style. Then I might say images. You could do this by section or by type of content, just something to keep it a little bit organized. These are our CSS comments. Okay, so we'll move this body typography down here. We'll keep the image there. Okay, typography. So now let's target our other elements. So we've got our H1. We want to give it some margin bottom. Okay, let's jump back to our design. We want to make it bigger by the looks of it, and we want to make it all uppercase, and we want to add some letter spacing. So let's say font size maybe 2.5 rem. Text transform, uppercase. Now just to mention, I've been doing this for over 7 years. So it's pretty easy for me to remember this stuff off the top of my head, but you should not set that as your baseline expectation that you haven't succeeded or you haven't learnt it until you can do it off the top of your head. Because for the first probably 1 to 2 years, I would always, when I was coding, have a notebook next to me. I'd have my cheat sheets. I'd be referencing things. Even now, students ask me things all the time. And if it's something that I don't do very often in my own projects, I'll have to Google it quickly to remember the exact syntax or the exact properties. So don't beat yourself up if none of this is coming to your head, off the cuff. I would not expect it to. What's more important is that you actually understand kind of what's happening once you have your memory refreshed by your notes or the video. Okay, so we've got our uppercase. Then let's do some letter spacing. Cool. All right, that kind of looks like here. Now in mine, I changed the color of all of the text. I often do this. So I use like a dark gray instead of black. I just think it looks a little nicer. So maybe 60, 60, 65. Subtle, but I think it makes a difference. Now let's target our H2. So again, we've got some margin. Cool. Let's see what else we had. Now it looks like this is thin text, not bold, and it's also got some letter spacing. So let's say font weight. Which font weights did we add? 300, 400, 700. Let's try 400. Nah, let's try 300. Okay. And then letter spacing 2 pixels. Might make this one 4. And text transform uppercase. Cool. I'm sure a graphic designer could have a lot of critiques as to how we would make this even prettier. And it looks like there's a bit more difference in my example between the main heading and the secondary heading. So let's go ahead and make that even bigger. We've still got quite a bit of space to to work with. So let's make this one 3 rem. And let's make this one 1.5. And you can flip the view if you want to see like what it looks like in different layouts. So if you want to see it the full width of the page, you can change the view up here. Okay, so far so good. I'm pretty happy with that. I might decrease this margin a little bit. Okay. Now let's get into our links. So we're targeting our anchor links. These are our only anchor links, so we can just use the A. If we wanted to kind of future-proof the site and say, no, we're really only targeting these 3, we could again do nav space A to only target these links. And then if you added a link, say in the middle of here, it wouldn't affect that styling. So let's do text decoration none, color inherit, padding 1 rem. Now remember that special property when we're working with links to make it accept vertical padding and margin. Okay, let's give it a border, maybe 2 pixels. Maybe 1 pixel. Okay, now the padding has added space inside the box. We might also want to add space outside the box. So we could either target the link or the paragraph. Let's target the paragraph above because that's how we've done it with everything else. Okay, and I think in our first example, this was a lighter font weight. Okay, now back to our links. Let's see what they looked like. Cool, so these are grey. They're a bit lighter than everything else, and actually all of our text is a bit lighter than the main heading. Helps to give a bit more contrast between the two. We've got some rounded corners, we've got some space between them, we've got a little bit of letter spacing. Let's have a look at that. So come back to our links. We try text, not text decoration, text transform. Make it a little bit smaller so it's not quite as dominating over the heading. Let's try 400 for both. I think 300 is a bit light. Okay. Now a lot of this is just guessing. I'm just playing with things, seeing what works, finding colors that I like. Okay, now let's add some border radius. This will give us those nice rounded corners. And then next to our padding, let's do some space between each one. So if we do margin right, that'll give us some space between. And maybe we say 0.5 rem. Yep, looks good. Okay, so now we probably want to add a hover effect to these. So let's go to our link, and below that, so now we're selecting our links when they're being hovered, but only the links that are inside the nav. Okay, and we might want to change the border color as well. Let's go with something a little bit less jarring. Teal. Now I could rewrite the whole border property, this 1 pixel, solid, etc. Border color is only targeting the color. So then if I change the thickness of the border up here, it won't affect anything to do with the hover. Cool, alrighty. So let's drag it up, see if we can see it closer to full screen. And this is what our website looks like. Let's see. Full page view. All right, pretty cool. There's one more thing that you might want to do, and that is to center this. I hadn't planned to teach you this, but I can envision that you're probably going to ask it. So this is a little advanced. Feel free to leave it as it is for now and just call it a day. If you want to center this side, what you can do is over here where it says Col6, put dash middle. And what that's going to do, we'll save it. Is vertically center this div inside this section, which is pretty cool. You actually couldn't do this easily with CSS a couple of years ago, but you know, technology is always changing and improving, and now it's really easy, especially with Gridlex. So just by putting that little dash middle on the end, it tells Gridlex to vertically center this container. So now you've got a gorgeous little splash page that is ready to go. Again, if you wanted to make these links link out to somewhere and open it into a new tab, you would use that target equals _ blank like we did in the last one. That's it.